Merry Christmas, you guys. I hope you had a great Christmas, but now that that holiday is behind us, let's compare a couple of movies that I kind of consider Christmas movies, but not really. These are by far the least Christmassy of all of the movies I've talked about this month, so I thought it was fair to talk about these movies after the holiday's over. So sit back, have some hot cocoa, and let's talk about one of the more unique attempts at updating an old property for a modern audience.
Revenge of the Remakes.
The Shop Around the Corner and You've Got Mail. Now, a lot of you are probably way more familiar with the remake You've Got Mail than the original Shop Around the Corner, but let me tell you, I had no idea this was a remake either until fairly recently. I'd say around last year. I came across this little gem on HBO Max, and I was like, oh, shoot. That's You've Got Mail, just set in the 40s. And that's exactly what this is, although there are some pretty major differences between the two movies, and we'll get into that. But You've Got Mail came out in 1998, was directed by Nora Ephron, and starred Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks as your antagonistic love interests of the movie. And Shop Around the Corner came out in 1940, was directed by Ernst Lubitsch, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and starred Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan as their antagonistic love interests of that movie. And if you're at all familiar with the premise of You've Got Mail, both movies follow that core tenet pretty accurately. The story centers around a man and a woman who just don't like each other. For whatever reason, they're at odds with each other at every turn. They're antagonistic towards each other. They just don't get along. But secretly, they've each been anonymously sending letters to some mystery person, they don't know who it is, and end up falling in love with the person that they're sending letters to, only to find out that the person they've been sending letters to is the person that they hate most in the world. But the differences between these two versions really come about in the particulars of how this story unfolds between these two people. For example, and probably most obviously, in the original, they send letters to each other through snail mail. They actually write out actual handwritten letters and send it through the mail, and then they have to wait a little bit to get the next ones, which makes sense for 1940 because that's how you did correspondence back then. But in 1998, with the advent of glorious dial-up internet and AOL Instant Messenger, now you can have correspondence through email and chat rooms, and it's a lot more immediate. You get a lot more feedback, a lot of back and forth that you don't really get in the original because it takes so long for the letters to come back and forth, and because of that, the actual correspondence is kind of a background thing for most of the movie. It only really comes to the forefront towards the end in the climax. But in the remake, as the title would suggest, that is the whole movie. They are just constantly sending letters back and forth, and that relationship is building, and there's tension in the real world, and there's also tension in the email world, so it's this whole romantic comedy situation that's rife with comedic possibilities. Both movies have really good comedic moments, some comedic timing, good delivery, and that's because this premise is so inherently funny that the person you're in love with online is the person that you hate in the real world. There's just so much you can do with that premise. To the point where now that we're coming to the end of 2022 and we have so many different social media options and DMs and Snapchat and everything, I'm shocked that we haven't gotten another remake of this concept, because now with social media, it's just another way to tell this story, and it has its own dangers. But that's neither here nor there. We're talking about the movies that were made, and another big difference between these two movies is how the couple knows each other in the real world. In the original, they work together. Jimmy Stewart basically runs this little shop, and the only one above him is the actual boss, the owner, played by Frank Morgan. You know, the wizard from The Wizard of Oz. Yeah, he owns this store, and Jimmy Stewart is basically the second in command. And they hire this new girl, Clara Novak, played by Margaret Sullivan, and immediately there's tension between her and Jimmy Stewart because Jimmy Stewart's character likes things very ordered, and he's done this business for years. He's worked his way up from an errand boy all the way up to second in command. So he has experience on his side, and he's got systems in place. He knows how things ought to be run. And now she comes in and she's shaking things up. She's doing things a little differently, using different sales techniques that are effective. You see them work in the movie, so you're not entirely on his side. You're kind of siding with Sullivan a little bit because she is an effective saleswoman, And that just frustrates him even more because she's not doing it his way. So as the movie progresses, the tensions just get higher and higher and they get more frustrated with each other. And while that tension and conflict is in the remake, it's brought to a different level because they don't work with each other. They're actually competitors. Meg Ryan's character runs and operates this little shop around the corner, which, haha, I see what you did there. And it's this rinky-dink little bookstore in New York City. It's very small. They've only got like 3 employees. But now you have Tom Hanks' character, Mr. Fox, and Fox Books, and it's this big conglomerate bookstore, and it's basically a Barnes & Noble. I'm pretty sure somebody wanted Barnes & Noble to sponsor this movie, to have their product placement on this giant epic bookstore, but obviously Barnes & Noble wouldn't go for that because Fox Books is the bad guy in the movie for all intents and purposes. Even though you do like Tom Hanks and his character, Fox Books, the entity, is not seen as noble in any way. So I do understand why Barnes & Noble might have passed on having their brand plastered all over this movie. But because of this, there's much more of a concrete reason for them to hate each other because he's actively trying to put her out of business. They are competitors, and Fox Books is the juggernaut that's just gonna stomp over the shop around the corner. And that's pretty much what happens in the movie. He does put her out of business. She does have to close up shop, which again escalates the tension, escalates their messed up relationship. It's not good. They're not on good terms for the majority of this movie. And I gotta say, while I do like the different dynamic of having to work together, having to show up at work and spend every day together while hating each other that the original has, I think I do prefer the remake better in this regard because there's so much more tension and anger and frustration, and you understand more why they hate each other to the degree that they do. And it's a much greater degree. Sure, you might hate your coworker because they're rude or insensitive or don't do things the way you like it, and that's, valid reasons to dislike a person. But in the remake, it's just elevated to a higher degree because on the one hand, you can look at it as not being personal, just business, but it feels personal. Meg Ryan really is the main character in this movie, where I would say Jimmy Stewart is the main character in the original, and that difference is significant because the stuff that happens in the original that we will get to really does center around Jimmy Stewart's experience and his struggle, where the remake really focuses on Meg Ryan's struggle in trying to keep open this business while you have Tom Hanks trying to shut her down. And I just think that because of this seemingly insurmountable obstacle, when they do end up coming together at the end, when they realize that they've been pen pals this whole time and they've actually fallen in love with each other, it just feels more satisfying because you see how far they've come. Compared to the original, where you do see how far they've come and it is satisfying, but not to the degree that the remake does. But something that the original has that I wasn't really expecting is a surprising amount of plot. Because the remake just centers around Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan's relationship and the difference between what they're like in person versus online. That's really what drives the story forward. But in the original, Stewart and Sullivan's relationship is there, and you do see it evolve over the course of the movie, but the correspondence side of it really is pushed to the background for the majority of the movie. But what's in the foreground for most of the movie is the relationship between Jimmy Stewart and his boss, Frank Morgan, because I guess somebody in the office was taking his wife out on dates, spending company money. He'd be giving his wife an allowance, but then that money gets spent somehow. So the boss, Mr. Matichuk, is very skeptical about the people that work for him, and he's especially skeptical about Jimmy Stewart because Jimmy Stewart's second in command, the most trusted, knows his wife, knows the family, actually went over for one of the holidays. So he is suspect number one, and through kind of a roundabout way, those suspicions get confirmed, even though it's clearly not Jimmy Stewart. It's actually this other guy, Mr. Vedas, who I swear is played by Danny Kaye. Even though he's not played by Danny Kaye, he just looks and acts and sounds like a Danny Kaye type character. But it really messes with me because I look at him and I'm like, you're Danny Kaye, are you not? But no, it's a different actor, and we know that this is the guy that's the guilty party because he rolls up in like a Rolls Royce and he's wearing the finest clothes, and he's the one that actually has been delivering the money to his wife. So it's plausible that he could have been taking a cut or giving it to his wife, taking his wife out on dates. You can clearly see that that's where all this is going. And for a lot of the movie, that's what it centers around, is the relationships between the people in the office. And eventually, Mr. Medichek, the boss, ends up firing Jimmy Stewart because his suspicions are confirmed. And now Jimmy Stewart's at his lowest low. It's actually here where the movie gets surprisingly dark because Mr. Medichek actually attempts suicide. He's about to shoot himself in the face because he's so depressed that he lost his best employee. His wife's been cheating on him. He's been losing all this money, so he doesn't see any way out, and he's about to shoot himself. Then the young teenager errand boy, who may or may not officially work for Medichek and Company, actually saves his life, and he has kind of a nervous breakdown, goes in the hospital. He's out of commission for a while, and throughout all this and his recovery, he actually brings back Jimmy Stewart, reinstates him as not just his old position, but as the boss while he's in recovery. So now he's actually in control of the office, and he starts making some changes, and now you're kind of back to status quo, and the animosity between him and Sullivan actually elevates, because now he's not just a more experienced salesman, he's actually officially her boss. So that goes about as well as you'd expect. But all that to say, the original has a lot more going on plot-wise. Even though it's only about an hour and 30-something minutes, it's quite short compared to the remake, which I think is closer to 2 hours. But even though the plot can be a little difficult to follow all the time, and some of the ideas get kind of thrown by the wayside again, like the correspondence, we get the relationship in the shop, but we don't really see what they're writing to each other. We don't get that side of the story. But the upside to that is that we really do get to know pretty much every person that works in this shop, and their personalities, their quirks, and they're all played by phenomenal character actors, and they all leave such an impression by the end of the movie that you're like, oh, that was a sweet little story. You really feel like you got to know this community of people. Where in the remake, yeah, there's side characters, and the movie does include another love interest for each of the main characters. So Meg Ryan has this writer boyfriend that she's living with, that they think they're in love, they think they're perfect for each other, but over the course of the movie she realizes that he's not, and kind of lets him go, and they leave on good terms. It's kind of the same thing with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks has this girlfriend who is supposedly perfect for him. She's also in the book business. She's a publisher, and they have a lot in common, and they're both big industry moguls, but he realizes that he doesn't really love her like that. So again, they kind of split on decent enough terms, which then of course opens the door for Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks to meet each other and fall in love, because now they're not attached to anybody. But a lot of that movie is relationship focused, and I really got to give Nora Ephron credit on this, because she took The Shop Around the Corner, which is a charming movie about a community of people, a relationship between a man and a woman, and how they got to know each other and how they hated each other but then ended up loving each other. It's sweet. And she took that and lasered in on the relationship between the two leads and made that the movie. And I just think that's so effective, and it makes you really care about those people, even though you don't get that sense of community as much with the side characters. You really get to understand Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan and their relationship, their characters. They are so well fleshed out by the people around them, but also in their relationship to each other. And a lot of that's because we finally get to see what the letters say, because while they're typing out their letters, we get voiceover, and we get voiceover mixed with on-set audio of them talking while they're typing. So I don't even know how they made that work on set. That's kind of amazing that they were able to blend voiceover and on-set audio that well. It's really cool. But because we're privy to that information, it makes us care that much more about these two people. I would argue more than the original does, because we don't get that information in the original as much. It's all secondhand, like, oh, well, I talked about this. But in the remake, you see the emotion and emphasis on certain words and how it's sent versus how it's taken. And it's just way more dynamic in the remake, and it's so effective. I love this movie so much. I like both of them, but at the end of the day, which one do I like better? I gotta give it to the remake. It just takes what was good about the original and synthesizes it, simplifies it, takes those core elements, expands on them to make it more emotionally impactful. And in my opinion, I think it's funnier. So as a comedy, I think it works better. I laughed way more times in the remake than I did in the original. And that's not to say the original isn't funny. It has its funny moments, but most of those funny moments don't come from the situation at hand, but a lot of it comes from the side characters and their quirks and their little idiosyncrasies and their accents. And that's funny, but that's like 1940s humor. versus 1998 humor, which is just a little more contemporary and quippy and all around funnier. So I gotta give it to the remake in this case. I like both of them, but You've Got Mail truly has stood the test of time despite how dated the AOL Instant Messenger thing is. And again, I would like to see somebody take on this subject matter in a more 2020s interpretation of how people would get to know each other anonymously online. I think that could be very entertaining to see. But now I turn it over to you guys. Which version do you like better? Are you a fan of The Shop Around the Corner? Again, there's a lot of personality in that movie. I don't hate it. I think it's cute, but come on, You've Got Mail's gotta be better, right? But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.